Hello, welcome to J Lowe Artist YouTube channel. Today we'll be doing some drawing with graphite. So get out your pencils, your cotton swab, kneaded eraser, anything that you think you need to draw with. Have it right handy, and let's draw together. Remember, art makes life better. Thank you for being here, by the way, and thanks for drawing with me. It's always nice to have people to draw with. The first thing you want to do as you're holding your pencil like this, you want to establish the size of your object. And so we want to take up our whole page. Good composition says that you come close to or touch 3 of the 4 sides. So in this one, we're going to leave a little bit of space on the left here, and we'll just start out and say, well, we want his shoulder to be up here. So about an inch or so, inch and a half, 2 inches from the top. Just make yourself a little mark and say that's where his shoulder goes. And somewhere down towards the bottom, maybe about the same distance up, you can say, well, that's where his foot's going to go. And now you've established your size. This is how big you want it. And when you look at our scrap, you say, well, that head's going to be about that big right in the center. So you can kind of say, well, there's his head right there. And you can move it over. Maybe it's not as big as you want it. You can go bigger or smaller. But we have to establish our point of reference first. Without that point of reference, you don't know how big to make anything. You can even put in that fish if you wanted to. You said, well, his nose is going to kind of come down here. There's kind of a candy corn shape right there. There's his nose. And in that nose, there's the shape of a fish, and it's probably about this big. And you just simple shapes. If that's too big, you can always make it smaller. But just simple shapes. Just keep it there, simple shapes. There's kind of this cylinder for his leg. Comes down from about the middle of where his nose is. Kind of comes down in there, and there's his leg. And he's got a foot there. Not going to worry about that foot. His body is this kind of, if I went from here all the way out, here's his rear end. His body's just this kind of circular shape, about like that. And his shoulder's going to come up here. Maybe that's where his shoulder is. Maybe I need to make his body a little bit more. His arm could be this kind of cylinder shape, or this little maybe jelly bean kind of shape that kind of comes in like this and curves. And you, again, adjust it. Make it as big as you think you need it. If it's too small, make it bigger. Don't erase it yet, though. If you erase what's wrong, then you've erased your point of reference. And don't be concerned about all these lines that are in there. We're going to be sketching in value anyway, so might as well just keep it there. His back leg almost touches that front leg right there, so there's just a little shape back in there. Now we've established our size. And that may not be exactly how big we need to make it. Maybe you need to make it bigger. Maybe you need to adjust it a little bit. So look at what you've got and then adjust it. You can always make it bigger or smaller. Whatever it is, just adjust it. Adjust, adjust, adjust. Drawing is kind of like a camera that is out of focus. And the more you draw, the more you focus in on it. His little ears are like little bumps, little oval kinds of things. You can make little circular shapes or little ovals kind of at the top there. And then analyze it. Are they too far apart? Are they too close? You know, mine's too far apart. I got to go in just a little bit. Once you draw it right, if it confuses you, you can erase what's wrong. But some of these lines, like I say, we're going to be drawing lines in there anyway. Then you can say, well, okay, this fish is kind of turned down. Its little flipper tails out here somewhere. You can add that. That head isn't quite round. It's a little more, what, light bulb shaped, sort of, almost. And you just keep adjusting. His eyes are almost in the middle of that shape. So if I went from his ears to his nose and went right down the middle, that's about where his eyes are. I can't really see what's going on there, so I'm just going to mark them in there. You can mark them with a little oval, or you could put just a little shadow in there. However you want to do that, you could mark them in there. So far, we don't have any strong lines. Now, I'm going to start adjusting. I kind of look at it and go, okay, you know what, that leg needs to move over here just a little bit. So I'm going to adjust that over. This paw's too big. I'm going to adjust that. I can see part of his back leg there, so I'm going to adjust that. So you just keep adjusting until you're happy with the shape of the things you've got. And again, don't worry about some of these lines. We're going to be sketching in there anyway. Like I say, if this is your very first time drawing, hopefully, and it is kind of weird, but hopefully you'll get the knack of it, and after a while of practicing this, it'll come very natural to you. While we're at it, we can't have our bear floating, you know, he's not levitating. And so I'm just going to put in some of these rocks. Maybe there's some little bumpy areas there, just there's a little shine in the water. Just do a little back and forth at the side of your pencil like this. Just back and forth. Water, anytime you do water, it's very horizontal, very linear. So seaweed or rocks or whatever's in there, just back and forth. And you don't need all this stuff in the background, but just enough to say this bear is not floating. He's in the water, or he's on the shore here. And we can do some rocks and stuff later on. Now, we haven't worried about fins. We haven't worried about, you know, hair or anything on the bear. There's nothing to worry about here yet. Just look at it and adjust it. Whatever needs to be adjusted. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the side of our pencil, like we've been doing, to get some basic values. So if you squint your eyes at the bear, you'll start seeing just some shapes of dark and light. We're not looking at detail. We're not looking at, you know, fuzzy hair or anything. We're just dark and light. So I'm going to start with his ear. His ear is kind of dark, so I'm just going to shade that in. And shade in a little bit of there. There's a little bit, there's kind of this little diamond-y shape right there at the top of his head. Shape that in. His other ear is a little darker too, right there. And maybe a little darkness that comes down off his head right there. His little nose, it's right there. It's kind of dark. I'm going to shade that in. Just with the side of my pencil. And if it's not quite in the right place, I can always change it and always adjust it. His eyes are kind of dark. I'm just going to shade those in. A little darkness around the side of his nose. And I'm not trying to be exact. Everything still is very superficial on the surface. In other words, I can erase this, all of it. I could erase it and you'd never know it was there. And so I'm just going to do these little dark shapes that I see, leaving out any light. So here, that little fin is kind of poking out there. I can leave that out. His little claws, if you want to leave those out, you could. Just anything that you look at and you think, okay, that's kind of dark, I'm going to leave that out. And hopefully it's starting to look like a bear and a fish. And we're going to manipulate some of this graphite too. We'll be able to move it around and smear it and do all sorts of things with it. So just wherever you see some darkness, just throw that in. Now, this is by no means perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into it and go, okay, what can I lose? I'm going to lose some of this edge here. I'm going to take my kneaded eraser. I'm going to get rid of some things. Some of those edges maybe. Although he's pretty dark, a lot of that can just stay in there. But there's some light edges, like right up on his neck. It's almost as light as the background is, so I can get rid of that. And because that graphite that we put on already is so superficial, sitting on the surface, it's easy to get rid of. It's easy to change it. I'm just going to add that little mouth of the salmon that's there. So now I'm just kind of looking at it, adjusting it, making it a little thinner or a little fatter, whatever you feel like you need. A little shadow up there. Just adjust it, whatever you need. So you should end up kind of with this kind of ghosty image of this bear. I'm not drawing very heavy. This is very light. And I can go through and shade whatever I want to. And if I feel like it's a little darker, I'm going to do some shading in there. Now what I want to do is I want to take my cotton swab and I want to do a little bit of blending. All that blending is going to do is just kind of smooth out the surface. And there are certain areas that I like to have nice and smooth. And so I'm going to take my cotton swab and I'm just going to start in one of those dark areas and just start blending it. Just smooth it out. I can even use that on my edges. Like his ears are really soft and fuzzy, and there's some hair up in there that you're not really sure where it starts and stops. So I'm just going to use that cotton swab to get that edge, and that will make that nice and soft and fuzzy. And grizzly bears are soft and fuzzy. I would not stop and pet one in Yellowstone if you ever come up to one. Yeah, those soft fuzzy things might eat you. So I've been reading stories about mountain men and grizzly bears. You know, Europeans, which is kind of what mountain men are, had no idea about grizzly bears and things like that. And it wasn't until Lewis and Clark in 1804 went out west that they ran into grizzly bears. First grizzly bear they ran into, they shot him 27 times before he died. And they're like, whoa, this is an amazing critter. So from then on, it's like, we need bigger guns. So they actually, they took large caliber rifles out there that course, they've got big round balls. So the normal gun that the military is using is a 75 caliber rifle. It's a musket. So they took out these muskets, but they were only good at close range. There just wasn't enough oomph behind them. And even at 190 grains of powder, still couldn't bring down a grizzly. Native Americans said, you know, we just don't bother the grizzlies, and the grizzlies don't bother us. When you hear about mountain men like Coulter and, you know, some of these other guys that get roughed up by grizzly bears, it's not the grizzly bear's fault. The mountain men started it, because grizzly bears would have left them alone. So can you see them kind of starting to come into focus? I mean, there's no details, there's no high contrast here. We just keep it focusing, little at a time. Once you've loaded some of that graphite onto that cotton swab, you can actually draw with that cotton swab. So you can do his fur. Look how soft and fuzzy that is. So the idea is just keep going until you're kind of get him into where you want, where he's kind of focusing. He's still soft and fuzzy, very light. Nothing really dark on this page. One thing too that I'd like you to kind of keep in mind is that we don't want to draw a heavy line around everything. I don't know where we get that from, but that urge to draw a line around everything, you got to kind of get rid of that urge, because it's not going to do you any good here. You want those edges to take care of themselves, especially with fur. I'm just going to take my cotton swab while I've got some graphite on it and do a little bit on the fish. You know, he's kind of light and soft too. Alrighty, so are you guys ready for the punch? For the part that really is going to make this pop? And that is your contrast, the dark. So you need really heavy values, really strong values. And so we're going to do that with our 6B pencil. So now that you've established everything, again, this is very superficial. It's on the surface. It's easy to get rid of. There's really very little detail in there. Even though it kind of looks like there is, there really isn't. So now I'm going to throw in some detail. And I always start with the face, because that's kind of where my emphasis is. This area here and the fish, maybe that's our area of emphasis. The rest of it, you look at his big paws and you look at some of these other areas, but your eye always goes back up there to the face and to the fish. So that's really what I want to concentrate on. I'm going to start with the eyes. And even though I can't see his eyes, I can't see anything going on in there, I'm just going to start with these little dark areas. Part of that is I kind of know what a bear's eye looks like. So I'm just going to go in, and I'm on detail mode now because I really want to grind this darkness into the surface. You can, if you want, you can do it like this too, but you choke up, go right to the tip and really give it some pressure and really drive that graphite into the surface. There's a little line, it's called a feathered line. What I'm doing is I'm just taking this line, I'm doing a little flip, 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 flip. You flip it up, you can flip it down, but this is a feathered line. And when you go in and blend it, there's a lot of graphite in there. You can go in there and blend that, and that feathered line gets very soft, like hair, like fur. Does that make sense? So that's what I want to do. I want to just feather that in, and that's going to give the texture that I need and the values that I need. And And we don't have a lot of time, and so I'm trying to get in as much information as I can without spending too much time on one thing. Wherever it's dark, feathered lines. And these feathered lines go in the direction that the hair flows. And in an animal, you start out from between the eyes, and all this stuff will go out to that side, and all this will go out to that side, and it just kind of parts in the middle. So with that, hopefully that starts to work out, and I get that little edge. The rest of it, these little values, are just kind of zigzags. And I know you look at it and you think, gosh, Mr. Lowe, you look like you're just scribbling. Well, I am. We're going to call this a controlled scribble. Scribble, scribble, scribble. And I'm trying to avoid line, big lines. I just want enough little zigzaggy kinds of things. So anywhere it's dark, I'm just going to put in these little zigzaggy lines. I'm not thinking of this as a nose. It's not a nose, it's just a shape of darkness. And if my viewer sees it as a nose, then that's a bonus. So just zigzag through it. She's got these little nostrils in there too. They're kind of hard to see. So I'm just going to throw in these little nostrils. They're kind of like little, I don't know, little upside down Nike swooshes. And just scribble in some of that darkness around it. And one thing too is you got to realize you're going to be blending this, smearing it around. So if it's a little lighter than the other area, just let it go. We can blend some into it. If it's a little darker, you can throw some in there. Don't be afraid to skip some too. If it's light, just leave it out. When in doubt, leave it out. So if you look at it, you think, I don't see that edge. If it's just darkness, just throw in the darkness and leave the edge out. Like his eye. I don't know what's going on in there. I don't see it. Something is, and it's kind of dark. Just throw in that darkness. It'll come through, and the viewer, your audience, will kind of look at it, and they'll figure it out too. Part of the joy of art is participating with it. And if you can leave enough out that your audience can kind of draw it in with their own imagination, they'll like it. And remember, we're going to be blending this. So that feathered line, just kind of put that in there. That edge that's down here, that's lighter, that you see on the bear, just do his shoulder, his arm right here, and leave out a little area there, or just let it kind of bleed into it, and that edge will come through. Don't need to draw a line there. Okay, does that make sense? So this is going to be the edge of its head, his jowls, his chin. You scribble it in. And then as we blend it, it will look soft and fuzzy, and right now it looks kind of porcupine-like because those edges of our pencil are hard. But when we blend it, it'll look softer. This fur is kind of matted too from the water. So we want to give that texture. So just so you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to just kind of blend this in together. Pick up on some of that graphite that's in there. And if I don't have enough, I can always come back into it and add more. There's parts that you blend more than others. And you get to choose that. So don't be afraid to leave a little bit out. You can always come back in and add more. Does that make sense what I'm doing there? I'm just anticipating blending. And then you go, well, look, it's still even darker in there. You can go back in and add more. You just keep adding it until you're happy with it. I'm just going to work on the fish right now. Not much to do on the fish. It's very light. There are a few little dark areas that kind of will add a little bit around his eye and his mouth. But remember, we're not doing a whole lot right now. In other words, we're not going to try to get it to look like the photograph. That's going to take us another hour. We don't have that kind of time. We want to get as much information as we can. Now, if you're drawing from life, like say you have a live model, they're going to move on you. You know, nobody can sit there for that long. And so you get as much information as you can. Understanding that, hey, that person's going to move or something's going to happen. So you just go as fast as you can, get as much information as you can. Now from a photograph, you can always go more. But we only have an hour. That's the amount of time we've given ourselves to practice That's all we got. Just go ahead and scribble in your darks and your lights. Well, your lights are already there. Scribble in your darks. I'm shifting down to this mode of drawing because it's faster. And nobody's really looking at his feet. I mean, you kind of do. You kind of look at the claws and things, but overall, it's just little shapes of darkness. So I'm just going to draw those in as quick as I can. So this is kind of what I mean by edges. Right here, it's so dark, what makes it look like fur are the edges. So if you leave the edges kind of soft and fuzzy, the rest of it can be solid. You can just scribble in some graphite and call it good. So I'm just shading in some darkness here with the side of my pencil. Because the side of my pencil is wider, I can get a lot more space. Therefore, it takes me much less time. I think the biggest fear you'd have of a grizzly bear if you were like a mountain man is that grizzly bear eating your horse. Because then you were stuck to do everything on foot. Little areas of water that are splashing around. The easiest thing would probably take an aggressive eraser and take those out. I don't really have an aggressive eraser, so I'm going to just have to leave them out. See if I can blend around them. Then maybe take my kneaded eraser and take a few of them out. Is this faster for you? Have you got that knack down? I know it's weird. I know it feels weird. Persevere with it, and it will feel natural after a while. But holding your pencil like this is much, much faster. Once you've got all that graphite on there, look at what your cotton swab can do and how you can blend it. That's just fast. Get those soft fuzzy edges, and you're going to get so much graphite on that cotton swab. When it finally comes time to do all these little rocks and things, look how fast you can do those rocks. You can do the fish scales, the fins, all with that cotton swab. Some of this area up in his fur is kind of light. If you get to the point where you're like putting in too much darkness, I'm going to do that here. I'm just going to put in too much by blending too much. You get to that point and you go, oh man, I just got rid of all that nice light. Just take your kneaded eraser, pinch it down to this nice little point, and just come in and touch little areas. You don't need a lot, but that'll bring that out too. Sometimes you can draw with that kneaded eraser. Always have to have a fresh edge though. And you don't have to really rub it, you just touch it. And it'll come out. You just touch it. Touch, touch, touch. That, by the way, is called reductive drawing. Or you take away from it rather than draw it in. And some people really like that. So just keep adding whatever you need. Till it's the way you want it. And then all that ground stuff that's in there, the rocks or the mud or whatever that stuff is, you do that with your cotton swab. And it's fast. Nobody's looking at the rocks. I mean, you notice it's there. You don't really get in there and analyze it. Last thing you want to do with your eraser is just pull out any lights. And add any darks with your 6B that you need. And you got it. If you've got, in your kit, you get one of these little erasers like this. This is probably a little more aggressive, and you pull out some of those highlights in the water you've got in there. So maybe you could do something like that, pull those out. you're coming to the end of your drawing, you kind of want to be thinking about where you want to put your signature. Your signature is part of the overall composition and how it looks. And so you want your signature to be somewhere that is not being too obtrusive, but you also want it someplace where people can see it. So for me, a good spot would be either right here in the front, down by his paw down there, or maybe over here in the back, or maybe down in there somewhere. And so what I do is I'll either take my finger or my pencil and I'll stick it there and say, okay, if something were there, would it be okay? You don't want it right on the edge, because if you frame this, then it'll cover it up. So as you're coming to the end there, be thinking about where you want that. It's part of your composition. It's your copyright. How about that? We got through the whole drawing. Hey, thanks for drawing with me today, by the way. I'm glad you were here. And as you sign it, just remember, art makes life better.